Hello everyone and welcome to Sunup. I'm Lyndall Stout. A good portion of Oklahoma saw some much needed rainfall last week. Today we begin with Sunup's Curtis Hare and our Extension Cropping System Specialist, Dr. Josh Lofton, to see how much that rainfall was able to help producers.
When we think about a year ago from this weekend, October 10th, we have that first really big ice storm that hit this north central Oklahoma, and what we're looking at this weekend is some really hot conditions, and while we've had some moisture across a good portion of the state, a lot of that moisture was a little too little, and a lot of it's starting to dry up with these temperatures we still have that are relatively high for this time of year. So while that rain was a good reprieve, helped a lot of folks really start getting winter crops in the ground, it's going to be only short-lived, and so we're going to need to continue that rain on into the fall to make some of this stuff work.
So, speaking of, like with winter crops, canola, the last time we spoke with you, were expecting canola, like the acreage to be more, but with these dry conditions, how do you think that's going to impact the canola crop?
Yeah, so as opposed to wheat that has this really long planting season, we can plant in September and we can graze it, we can plant all the way into November. Canola has a very, very narrow planting window. We typically see our best canola go in that last week in September, first week in October. So we're kind of on the back end of that best timeline for canola, and we typically need those really good, nice seed bed conditions. I think there's still a lot of potential, especially places that got a good amount of rain this last week. Places like here in Stillwater where we only got a half inch and we're seeing that drying conditions, and a lot of ground wasn't worked previous to those moisture, and we're working that ground, drying that ground out, then I think the canola acres or the potential acres will be a lot less than we maybe could have had if we had a lot wetter September. So I think there's still a place for canola. We have to remember that insurance deadline's the 10th. We can stretch to the 15th, and agronomically we can make the 15th work, especially if we have a nice warm fall with some moisture. We can make a little bit later planting work if you're not insuring it. The other thing to think about is cover crops. A lot of folks interested in cover crops, and we really want those already to have been in. We want those to go in and cover the ground and provide good ground cover over winter on into the early spring. And once again, depending on what our fall brings us in end of October, November, and December, if we're not warm with some good moisture, we're planting those cover crops now, we might not get the canopy coverage we really would like to see with a cover crop. So, and then a lot of our cover crops have broadleaf mixes to them. That's what adds the spice, the nitrogen, the biotillage, something along those lines is typically brought in with our broadleafs. Once again, we don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks. We could hit a big freeze event. It could be 90 degrees still.
The joys of Oklahoma.
I tell you what.
Yeah, but that's the seed going into the ground. So really, just real quick, let's kind of take a look back at some of our summer crops. How's that dry conditions, impacting harvest, and how are just summer crops shaping up?
Well, harvest going a lot faster than we typically would expect based on where the crop was in July. The crop was a little bit behind pretty much universally across the board in July, but that was because we were kind of cool. We had some of that good cloudy conditions. We got great rains, so we got a lot of growth in that early June, 1st of July. Well, when we got into August and that rain started to shut out, we started seeing those crops kind of go towards harvest a lot faster than we typically would see. For the most part, something that was planted real early, think about some of our dryland corn acres downstate, or dryland sorghum acres downstate. Those have been relatively unaffected. Actually, some of the reports I'm hearing are very good yields across the board. Those that are starting to come out now, think of our later planted milo or our soybean crop. That's where we're going to start to take a hit. And once again, that's where you see the variability of the rain that happened this summer. Where you caught rain, the soybeans are looking good. We had a plot that probably looked to be 60, 70 bushel potential. It's only cutting 20 or 30 bushels. So we lost a lot of that top end off because of that heat, but also that moisture in August and September. And it was just unrelenting. It was just constant heat and dry conditions. But we're going to need some help if it's not too late on the back end.
All right, well, we'll check back in with you in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Josh. Josh Lofton, Crop and System Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Welcome Welcome to the weekly Mesonet weather report. I'm Wes Lee. The state finally got a decent amount of rain recently after about a month of nothing but dry weather. The 7-day rainfall map from Wednesday shows some pretty significant accumulation scattered across the state. Most Mesonet stations received at least something. Amounts range from just over 1/10 of an inch at Clayton to almost 4.5 inches at Lahoma. It is easy to see those that received enough rain to penetrate down to 10 inches on this weekly change in the fractional water index map. The green areas all are showing some improvement week over week in the soil moisture levels. Looking at the actual index numbers at 10 inches, we still see lots of areas that need significant help in red. Numbers close to the 0 end of the scale are extremely dry at that particular depth. There are only a handful of sites at the wettest end of the scale at 1.0. The next chance of rainfall may come as early as late in the weekend. The forecast map for next week looks promising as well. The light greens indicate that the chances are leaning to above normal precipitation for the week. Hopefully we can get some rain in the areas that missed out last week. Now here's Gary with recent changes to the drought map.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, the good news is we actually got some rain. At least some people did. The bad news is a lot of people didn't. Let's get straight to the new Drought Monitor report and see what we have. Well, we did have some improvements where that rain fell, and we'll see that in just a minute on the rainfall map for the last 30 days. But we still have more than half the state covered in at least moderate drought. And we've actually had some areas that got a little bit worse. If we see out in the far western panhandle, we now have a little spot of extreme drought. So things improved a little bit in some areas, and they got worse in other areas. That's about the usual case for Oklahoma and its rainfall patterns. Well, Wes showed you those short-term rains. Let's take a look at the longer-term rains. Let's go for the 30-day Mesonet map, and that really just mirrors that short-term rain. We did have areas, very isolated areas, from 2 to as much as 5 inches in some cases. But again, that was few and far between. When we look at those blue and lighter green areas on the map, those are areas that didn't get enough rainfall. That shows up a little bit more when we look at the last 30 days departure from normal rainfall map. And again, we see deficits over much of the state from 2 to 4 inches. Some surplus amounts of 1 to 2 inches, but those again are very few and far between, and unfortunately that yellow part of the map where it signifies 2 to 3 inches below normal, way too much of that colored on this map. But where it really shows up nicely is on the percent of normal rainfall for the last 30 days. Those reds and oranges really pop out. We see that across much of the southern part of the state, parts of north central, and the Oklahoma Panhandle. But those areas of good rains also stand out pretty well, the areas of greens. Those are areas that at least saw some improvement on the latest Drought Monitor report. With some chances for rain next week, we can just hope that we get another bit of improvement on the Drought Monitor map, but we'll keep an eye on it for you. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Dr. Brian Arnall joins us now to talk about the high cost of fertilizer and some good news that it has rained. So Brian, get us up to speed on all of that.
Yeah, so like you said, we've got some moisture in part of the wheat belt that we really needed to get this crop in the ground and up and going. But producers are right now really challenged with this problem of fertilizer price. And honestly, it's not going to get any better in the near future. And then nitrogen has just been on the rise with manufacturing issues, Ida influencing the Gulf Coast, and just other things going on that fertilizer price is going up. So producers have been really left with, what do we do? How do we manage with these given prices?
The timing of all of this is really unfortunate given that it's wheat planting time here in Oklahoma.
Yeah, and so the producers are right now making the decision, primarily the decision on pre-plant nitrogen application and starter fertilizer, that DAP application or the MAP, so the 18460 or 1152.0 applications. Recommendations I would give, at least for the phosphorus right now, is soil testing. This year soil testing is so critical, right? If our soil tests are below that critical threshold of either 65 soil test phosphorus from the OSU lab or 32 ppm, that starter fertilizer, a little bit of that phosphorus in row is going to be beneficial. Even if you're close to that critical value, there's going to be at least 50% of the field that is going to need the phosphorus due to either soil acidity or low phosphorus. So that starter, even a lower volume, is such a value in our soils that may be low in phosphorus or low in pH.
So the key is starting with a soil sample and then going from there. Maybe you can use a lot less than just guesswork.
Absolutely. And it's not just a lot less. We have to acknowledge that even with the high price, the fertilizer has return on investment when it's needed. So don't just go without. This last year in Alva, we had some fertilizer studies that looked at phosphorus response in wheat up there, and we had a 40 bushel response to phosphorus. Without it, we just couldn't make it. And so that 40 bushel response, even with today's prices, would have easily covered the price of the 50 pounds of phosphorus we needed to get there. So just because the price is high doesn't mean it's not worth it. We got to have that soil test though to help show us where the value is and where it's not. And there's still time.
This is always an exciting time of year. In this field, for example, we see the baby wheat starting. It's always promising, it's always full of hope, but again, there's those management strategies that you always have to adapt given whatever the circumstances are.
Absolutely, and this year adaptation is going to be the key, being adaptive on our nitrogen. If we're grain only on our nitrogen, hold back. We have all the science, all the technology developed here in Oklahoma showing that we do not have to go pre-plant with our nitrogen, that it can wait until we know we have a stand, until we know what the environment is like, and wait until the spring. So if you don't have your nitrogen bought and you're afraid of not getting it down pre-plant, it's okay for grain only. We're going to be all right. If we don't get rain, we may not need more nitrogen, so it's okay to wait.
Well, we'll see how things go, and we will see you again here on Sunup in a couple of weeks. Thanks a lot, Brian.
Good morning, Oklahoma. Welcome to Cow-Calf Corner on Sunup TV. And this week, we're going to address how much milk potential or milk that cows give, their maintenance requirements, and some of these things that relate to our management of those cows. And Dave, I know you've had the opportunity here to do some unique things in this trial where you're actually milking these cows, something we wouldn't typically do in beef production, but it's permitted you to gain some insight over what's going on some of these topics.
Yeah, for sure. We've learned quite a bit, and it's a really interesting topic. You know, we've discovered in our cows here at Oklahoma State anywhere from around 20 pounds up to, we've got one cow herd that routinely gives about 30 pounds of peak lactation if they're on real lush quality, lush spring forage. The things that we found make a lot of sense in terms of the energy concentration in milk is generally greater than what the diet can support. 1 pound of milk, Mark, contains about 0.33, about a third of a megacalorie of energy. Lush spring forage contains about 0.7 megacalories. So theoretically, 1 more pound of forage intake should support 2 more pounds of milk. The problem is the cows cannot, if they're already getting all they want to eat, and you program them genetically to produce more milk, they can't consume that much more forage. The research shows that for each additional pound of milk production, you get somewhere between about 0.2 to 0.3 pounds more forage intake. And so if you continue to program for more milk production, she's going to get a little bit more negative all the time, or your herd would get a little bit more negative, and you'd expect them to have a harder time maintaining their body condition.
We know a lot of producers aren't going to be milking cows, but we're relating this to, if we've got thin cows right now, what the consequence of it is, and well, I'll let you run with that one. What?
Well, I mean, you know, I think you just have to be careful, you know your forage system. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to, over the years, select for the top 10% in any breed for milk production if you're fall calving, right? Because the forage quality is going to be low, and that increased milk production is going to require all those additional calories of energy, and those cows cannot consume enough more of that low quality forage. So there's just a really plain example. Doesn't make a lot of sense to go source bulls or sires, herd sires that have tremendous high genetic capacity for milk.
We need to look at, as producers, the amount of forage we can reasonably produce in a typical year and how to balance that with mature cow size and the milk level of those cows relative to them weaning a calf every 12 months and optimizing the amount of weaning weight they're producing relative to what it's costing to maintain them.
For sure, and the other big piece of that would be time of calving, because if you've got really big weaning weights, calve real early, you're going to have to make up that difference with some sort of purchased or harvested feed source, at least in the interim, until it greens up. So that's an important piece as well.
Sure, and as you mentioned a minute ago, we tend to talk a lot about spring calving herds, but even spring calving in your forage base versus fall calving in your forage base are things we need to consider in this situation.
Yeah, you might go looking for two different kind of herd sires in that situation. Yeah.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you being with us today and last week on this topic, and we appreciate you all joining us on Cow Calf Corner.
And a quick reminder about the upcoming Rural Economic Outlook Conference. The event will be held at the ConocoPhillips Alumni Center on the OSU campus next Wednesday, October 13th, beginning at 8 a.m. The conference will focus on rural economic conditions, current agricultural issues, and rural economy. For more information about this event, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
We're out here on this crisp Oklahoma morning, and we've had some recent rains. Daryl, what are forage and pasture conditions like?
They deteriorated a lot in September. The Drought Monitor shows that Oklahoma went from, very little drought. In fact, we had almost no drought at all in July. August was still pretty good, but in September, by the end of September, about 93% of the state was in some form of, at least abnormally dry conditions. So pasture conditions dropped pretty sharply through the month of September. A sharp drop in the good to excellent ratings and an increase in the poor to very poor category.
So does that mean we have pasture for winter grazing?
Well, the winter wheat situation, again, September wasn't good for planting wheat. Now, according to the USDA's crop progress report, we're about on pace as far as planting wheat and even emergence, which is still very small at the end of September. But, what I hear from folks out in the country, I think some of that wheat that was planted was dusted in. We're waiting for rain. We did get a rain starting on the last day of September. And so maybe that's going to come on here pretty quickly, that wheat that was dusted in. It looks like most of the rain probably would not cause a problem. There may be a few areas that got really heavy rains, and that'll cause problems if wheat was dusted in. It'll crust over, and they may have to replant that.
So what are feeder cattle markets looking like right now?
We're ahead of this time last year. Feeder cattle markets on average are about 8% higher than where we were this time last year. We did see them drop a little bit as we moved right at the end of September, and it's the time of year for that to happen. I think most of that is probably seasonal pressure. These dry conditions are probably causing that to some extent as well. If we get the rain and we get some wheat started, we may see a little bit of support in the market from that, but we'll probably still see some seasonal pressure in these feeder cattle markets through the month of October and into November.
And what about cull cow prices?
Cull cow prices, much the same situation. Cull cow prices have been quite strong this year. We're running 8 to 9% above where we were this time last year. They're also beginning to fall, and of course the cull cow prices typically fall to a pretty pronounced seasonal low in November. So as we move through the month of October, I would expect to see more pressure on those cull cow prices.
So the cost of feed is really high at the moment. What are producers going to have to keep in mind moving forward into the fall?
These input costs are rising. Obviously, feed costs are higher. Other input costs are higher, fertilizer and so on. So producers, will have that challenge. We are seeing better cattle prices, but in terms of the overall impact on, returns or profitability, producers really have to watch that cost side and manage those costs pretty carefully as we go into the winter.
All right, thank you very much, Daryl. Daryl Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Today I thought I'd share a little bit of information about the history of frozen food. When you walk into almost any grocery store in the US, it's easy to find frozen food year-round. However, this wasn't always the case. For centuries, game meat, fish, and grains could only be frozen and preserved during the winter months or in cold climates. It wouldn't be until 1861 that the first patent for manufacturing ice would be awarded to Eugene Dominic Nicole, a French engineer working at the New South Wales Fresh Food and Ice Company in Australia. Slowly, the frozen food industry would continue to grow. Unfortunately, it struggled with consumer acceptance because of issues with quality. This would begin to change when Clarence Birdseye patented a multi-plate freezing machine in 1927. Birdseye had been a fur trapper in Labrador, Canada between 1912 and 1916. During this time, he had the opportunity to observe how the Inuit went ice fishing and how they allowed their catch to immediately freeze in the cold air. After returning to the US, Birdseye would apply this concept in his company. The growth of the frozen food industry in the US would take off in the late 1940s and early 1950s as refrigerators became more common in American households. Frozen TV dinners would arrive in approximately 1954, helping to drive advances in freezing technology and consumer demand. Today, the frozen food market in the US is worth $65 billion in retail sales, and globally, the market is worth over $200 billion. So just a little bit of information for you to think about the next time you're in the frozen food section in the grocery store. Stay frosty. For more information, please visit sunup.okstate.edu or food.okstate.edu.
What a difference a week can make. Kim, last week wheat prices, you said, were kind of walling around, but there's been some movement up.
Yeah, they broke out the top, and you've got Medford prices up around 7.05, 7 a dime. I think right now the market thinks that wheat stocks are tied around the world. Egypt, they got a tender this week for some wheat, $320 a metric ton. That's $8.71 a bushel delivered. It was $242 a metric ton last year, or $6.57. Of course, part of that too is the tight stocks, but Russia's also got a $1.50 export tax on their wheat. So there's a lot of things going on around the world, but that tight wheat situation is the biggest driver, I think.
So, the market's predicting a tight wheat stock. So what, in your opinion, are the stocks actually tight?
In some locations, yes. In some locations, no. But you look at the world, ending stocks are projected to be 10.4 billion bushels, 9.9 billion bushels, 7-year average. You go back to 2018-19, world ending stocks were 10.4 billion bushels, and the average annual Oklahoma price was $5.10 a bushel. You look at the U.S., yes, our wheat stocks are tight. All wheat, 615 million bushel ending stocks, 990 average, so well below there. If you look at hard red winter wheat, 347 million bushels, 480 million bushel average, so U.S. stocks are tight. Now, there's some belief that Black Sea stocks are tight. 476 million bushel ending stocks there, 495 is the average. So real close to the 5-year average there. Their production is 4.3 billion bushels. You look at Russia, 367 million bushel ending stocks, 324 average, so they're slightly above average. However, this year's crop is only 2.7 billion versus 3.1 billion last year. However, 88% of Russia's wheat crop is number 4 or better. That means it's milling quality wheat, 87% of it. Last year, only 72% of it was milling quality. Even though they had a 3.1 billion bushel crop versus 2.7 this year, Russia has more milling wheat, 2.33 billion bushels versus 2.27 last year.
Well, there were 2 countries that you didn't mention that usually play a factor in all this, Argentina and Australia. So what's going on there?
Well, if you look at the world wheat harvest for the 2021-22 marketing year, it's about 90% complete. So we got Argentina and Australia, the 2 major exporters left. Australia, 1.16 billion bushels is their production. Their average is 890, so the third largest crop ever on production. Their ending stocks at 180 million bushels. It's normally 160. Argentina, their production is 735 million bushels, 690 average, above average production there. Their ending stocks 119 million bushels, 59 is their average, so above average ending stocks in both Australia and Argentina.
You know, the past 6 months with the especially with the wheat market, it's just been volatile is the word that we've been just using over and over. But with these high prices, do you think that that's going to last, or just still could be some shakeup?
Well, I think it'll last through at least next July-August period, because there's not another crop after Argentina and Australia, and we're already expecting big crops there. There's no other wheat crop coming on the market until the U.S. wheat crop starts in late May and early June. So I think these relatively high prices, now they might not stay above $7, but I think they're going to stay relatively high through our harvest, through the 22 wheat harvest.
Fingers crossed as always.
Yeah, yes, I think it'll work.
All right, thanks, Kim. Kim Anderson, grain marketing specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
That'll do it for us this week. A reminder, you can see Sunup anytime at sunup.okstate.edu, and also follow us on YouTube and social media. We'll see you next time at Sunup.